thingy is doing. I think it will surprise you. No. Oh, let's go. Yeah, we're live.
Good morning, beautiful people of the internet, and welcome back to the Sunday special chat with myself, Jay Howard, Piotr Ruznek, Adam Lawrence, and the fantastic Helen Chorley. Helen's only here for half an hour. She's in transit. She's heading back to Malta, of all places.
I am. I've been here 2 weeks, and it's time to go home, but I couldn't miss you guys this morning, so squish half an hour in, and then I'll got to disappear.
Brilliant.
Nice,
and Mr.
man.
Lawrence, we've got the Sunday supplement. How did that go this morning? I only read like the first 2 paragraphs. I was running very late this morning.
Confession time as usual. Well, due to squeezing the slot back a bit, I think you can be forgiven, Mr. Howard. It's reasonable, fair enough, really, especially as it's my fault. So I've had a tilt at really trying to summarise what I've been trying to say over the last sort of 21 months, which is sort of now coming to fruition in terms of inflation basically not being as easy to control as everybody said. And the hard bit now is there are some people sort of claim, oh, we've seen the peak. There's been quite a bit of discussion about the peak. And I think focusing on the peak is the wrong thing to do. I think you're falling into the media trap of, oh, you know, do any of us really, does it make a material difference if the number next month is 8.9 or 9.7 or 10.3? Not really. What matters is, number one, is it what people expected in general? Because inflation is all about expectations. If I think things are going to get a lot more expensive and I've got money to invest, I've also got money to for disposable income, I might be more likely to buy now if it's something like a holiday or a large home improvement or something like that. So it influences my behavior. Now, I know I watch these things a little bit more closely than the average punter. I appreciate that. But the collective mind of the economy is quite smart, actually, generally speaking. And people behave in certain ways. And you know, Bank of England and the Treasury understand a bit more about that these days and try to nudge these behaviours. But the amount of, rather than nudging, I think you could say, you know, we've all taken a full assault or two over the last couple of years, thanks to the way that things around the pandemic have been communicated. And that sort of fear hangover is still knocking around in the economy. So there's more savings than there would otherwise have been. That's a positive thing. But if people then get very scared again and they start to hoard cash because people are saying, well, the lights could go off, the kids might not be back at school, this might happen, that might happen. We had all of that over August, you know. We didn't really make too much of a fuss about it because I didn't think most of it was particularly noteworthy. I thought it was padding for papers that don't have a lot going on in August, really, generally speaking. And you need to be careful what you say, I think. But we're seeing a time where I still don't believe that the amount of inflation that there is that's been created by a number of factors during the pandemic has been baked in to the bond markets, which are critical for all of us that borrow money, and even critical for all of us that are involved in the property industry, even if we don't borrow money. Because even if it doesn't matter to you, there's reasons why it should. For example, if you can get 6.5% return without lifting a finger, you might want to reconsider whether working hard for 10, 15, 20, 25% really is worthwhile. It changes your risk premium. But more importantly than that, it changes the price and demand for property. Changes the demand first, and then that changes the price. So, you know, we're seeing in the States mortgage rates, the 30-year mortgage rate is it's not the only rate in the States. There are 15-year rates, of course. You can imagine if you refinance, you've got 15 years left in your earning time, or your active career, let's say. You might switch to a 15-year. There are other rates available, but the 30-year is the key definer because the first-time buyers tend to use the 30-year mortgage. And the 30-year rate is up around where it was in 2008, which you might remember is not the finest year that the US property market ever had. And that, of course, constrains affordability. We're not there yet. At their 30-year, and it's not the same because the US and the UK markets are not the same, especially in this respect. But the 5-year is the more popular of the suite of fixed rates that we tend to get offered in the UK. And the 5-year is not yet at 5.5%, nor is it near 5.5%. But interestingly enough, I told a little story and put a graph in about, the 70s, the 80s and the 90s and the overall base rate of interest. And I don't know what the phrase for it is, but it would be the reverse of rose-tinted spectacles. When people say, well, I remember when the Bank of England put the base rate up to 15% in one day and mortgages were 18% and things like that. And it's like, no, you don't. You don't remember it at all. Because if you look at what actually happened, the Bank of England, and at the time still controlled by the government, bear in mind, panicked and said, oh, God, everybody can't afford their mortgages. We need a new strategy here. And the new strategy needs to be sterling's coming out of the ERM and we're going to have a weak currency. We're going to let our currency, deteriorate over time. That was already weak by then because George Soros and his pals had worked out that it was an unsustainable, untenable position. So it's a bit of a reminder about what people think they know versus looking at actual facts and data. And what happened was the interest rate actually halved from there in a very short rate of time. And that was on the back of the inflation was actually 90, 91, still going a bit in 92, but it was on the way down. The difficulty is, the one thing I really would love people to take away from today's supplement is there's still some people out there saying, well, I think the interest rates are going to come back down because they'll panic and they'll do this, that. In the US, they call that the Fed pivot or the Fed put. The Fed pivot as in they change their strategy. The Fed put as in the stock market hits a certain level and the Fed go, okay, we've changed our mind. We're not going to be so harsh on tightening monetary policy. You cannot do that when inflation is increasing or is still well above target. It is not an option. The only option is to raise rates. Right now, there's a suite of fiscal policies that can come around that. And I'm sure the magic hat that Kwasi Kwarteng's going to use next week to pull all sorts of stuff out of is going to be a really, really interesting thing to understand when they go, oh, don't worry about it adding up. What we'll do is, and to be honest, I do like this rhetoric when interest rates are super low. If you can borrow at 0 or 0.5% and invest, great. If you've now got to borrow at 3.5, then the projects have got to be 7 times better than they otherwise would have been, right? So it's not impossible, but if you look at the average government project goes, I think it's 66% over time and 75% over budget. And we've discussed before how the public sector just cannot do things at an efficient level. And the NHS have to hide behind procurement companies so everyone doesn't just go, oh, it's the NHS, so I'm just going to add an extra 0 on. And that's the challenge you face in the public sector, of course, in procurement or whatever. You've got to kind of try and hit the balance. And I hope they can grow the economy. But the fact they're saying 2.5% is their target suggests to me that they won't hit 2.5%. And at 2.5%, the old rule of 7, if it's 10% a year, it takes 7 years to double. So at 2.5, it's not ideal. You do the maths, but it's about 30. So 30 years before we double the GDP, there's going to be some interesting bits along the way. But I don't envy, joking aside, I don't envy the job that they've got to do, because if it was me, I would be making the rhetoric more about, look, we're on a war footing on 2 fronts, right? One front is still the pandemic and the after, not the virus itself, but the after effects of the pandemic, right? And 2, we're also on a war footing because one of our European neighbours is at war, and the fallout of that war for them is horrific. And the fallout of that war for the rest of the world is energy related and food related, both of which are extremely concerning. So based on the fact we're on a war footing, how about some war bonds and a sensible attitude towards that debt and investing it. But you'd need to see. The trouble is, thus far, and maybe I'm being really unfair because the timing of the Queen's passing and all the rest of it, but thus far, what we've seen is quite a lot of chat and not a lot of detail. And that the continuity candidate bit, it's concerning that the continuity candidate is also going to continue, like Boris, not doing a lot of detail and then sort of saying things that are quite nice. And that ideological word that's cropped up all over the place looks like it's bang on, and whether it's the left or the right, I have no preference. I detest both extremes with equal vigor, but ideology is my least favorite word in the political dictionary, without a shadow of a doubt. So, and Jay, we should mention I went to see Jordan Peterson this week on Wednesday night, so we can go full Peterson at one stage, but maybe we need to that discussion might need to happen another day over a 14-hour drink or something like that.
Yes.
I'm not sure standing 9 a.m. is the best time for it.
Yeah, we need
every time is the best time for Peterson, Piotr. What are you talking about? Come on.
We need a whole session just dedicated to that. I'm like, you can't see because I think I've got a filter on, but I am green right now. Oh my God, I would have loved that. Wow.
Super jealous about that, actually. You posted the link. I was like, I just can't make it. I'd love to. I just can't make it.
I didn't see it.
Oh, man.
Oh,
yeah.
And to your question, what's the opposite of rose-tinted glasses? I was literally having this conversation yesterday because, as we know, that's a pet hate of mine. My personal opinion is blue-tinted glasses.
Not brown?
Actually.
I was thinking more brown, if I'm honest.
Easier to see all the shit if the glasses are brown, right?
But sunglasses are brown. Okay, oh yeah, I'll think about that.
I think it's more like I would say it's probably Polish tinted sunglasses, right? Because Polish don't deal with any of that rose tinted bullshit. There's none of that. Like Piotr's just like, no.
maybe it's just glasses off. There's no glasses.
Yeah,
no glasses required. Whatever you see is what you see. That's it.
Maybe.
I mean, some interesting points you raised there, Adam. I mean, I think there's a lot. I was talking to someone who's been trading properties for like 30, 40 years. I met him at Will's barbecue event. He seems like a nice enough guy. And we started talking about the market and how we're looking at buying in a trade and what's our trade exit and exits. And I said, well, there's a couple of auctioneers and auction type assets that are really starting to get a bit sticky at auction. Stuff that we think is going to fly. Really, I mean, the standard homes under the hammer, it's a wreck. It's going to cost you 10 grand to fix it up, and then you've made £1 million on the back end, right? They're still flying. There's ridiculous that stuff. People focus on the ones that do really well and just ignore all the other properties in the auction. Oh no, it's still a hot market, right? I was talking to this guy, and he goes, "Well, look," he goes, "go out there and tell everyone the market's crap." And I said, the reaction to that, the hedge to you telling everyone the market is crap, is everyone's going to pile more money in, thinking they're buying stuff because the market's gone down or the market's crap or it's easier to get a deal done. And there's, it's probably not as black and white as binary as that, but actually there's hedging points in these markets, right? Where you think, right, you bring the 30-year bond and the 30-year mortgage and things like that into the fore, and you think, well, that the whole idea, that dynamic, that instrument, it's a hedging instrument. It has to be, because it runs such a span of time that it will hedge the majority. It could hedge a Brexit, it could hedge a coronavirus, and it could hedge a Ukraine in that 30-year window. It could probably hedge that.
And I'm recessions we'll be expecting 30 years, probably three. Probably three-ish, so it's absolutely.
It could probably even swallow a couple of, aftershocks from those. And we're midway through an aftershock of Brexit. We're still battling coronavirus to a degree, so we're probably not completely through that as an aftershock. And we're smack bang in the middle of a European energy and war crisis, right? So, but you spread that across 30 years and see how that pans out on an economic forum, right?
Absolutely. There's so much variability. It's going to be hard to work out what the the driving forces are, and that's always the way. The problem is, and part of the problem with economics and why a lot of people can find it a bit dry, is that we can focus on and we can talk about one thing, and it's not one thing. There's all these variables changing all the time. The reality is the Bank of England and the Treasury are not in control of most of them. The hive mind of the economy and the private sector are in control of most of them. And there's a reliance on, I was thinking about this before we came on air, you know, in many ways, but Boris had a way about him. He's a big advocate of boosterism, right, which is talking things up all the time to make people feel good, because if they feel good, they go out, they spend money, it generates tax revenue. It's a self-fulfilling cycle upwards, although possibly not in inflationary times. Whereas I think what Boris would like to have been was more like a Churchill-style character. And what the country needs right now is a fairly rousing motivational speech to say, if I was the Chancellor, I'd be saying, look, there are limits to the power of what I can do. I'm going to take 3 hours sleep for the next however many years I'm in this post in order to try and do absolutely everything that I can. I've spoken with the Governor of the Bank of England. He's going to do absolutely everything that he can. What I need now is the businesses, the business owners, the entrepreneurs, but the workers and everybody, even if you're in the system, even if you need a bit of a helping hand at the moment, to do your level best, to work together to get us through what we're going through at the moment. And we're not expecting an amazing time, but the harder we work, the luckier we'll get. And that's what we need right now. So that's just the first draft. So
I think we should cut that bed. We should cut that bed and just send it to the Prime Minister's office. Just to repeat.
I mean, Adam, surely it's just easier to start a revolution and just completely pull down the government, monarchy, the monetary policy. Just start from scratch. You know, Fight Club. Just start.
You mentioned,
surely that's easier, no?
You mentioned, Jay, about Will's event that he held last week, and I had an interesting conversation with a guy. And the end of that conversation was, he said, well, the problem is capitalism doesn't work. And bear in mind, this is a property developer talking to a property developer here. And I said, well, the trouble is, you know where it comes from. It's the worst system apart from all the others, right? I still fundamentally believe that. And I think the qualifier needs to be unfettered free market capitalism doesn't work. And that's more shown in the US than it is in the UK. And that the flip side of the American dream is the American trap in the middle, where 47% can't afford a $1,200 medical bill, which happily is not something we have to deal with in the UK, although we do have our problems. So I still prefer we can gauge a society by how we treat its poor. And that's important, but also the incentive. One of the things that has worked well, in my opinion, over the last 12, and I try not to be politically ideological in any way, and I dislike all the parties, really, if I'm honest with you, even though I'm a member of all of them, just to keep my beady eyes on what they're doing. I think the problem is, you know, or one of the good things that's happened is that the incentive to work has been put more to the front of the queue. And then these recent national insurance rises that are going to be reversed next week are attacks on the workers. Now, the problem you've got at the moment is if you're on minimum wage, you're a bit screwed unless you're living with parents. If you're on benefits, you're very screwed because inflation is absolutely mullering what you're doing. You know, I was at an event yesterday. I spoke to a relative who is in the police force, and he's had a 2% pay rise this year. You know, 2. I mean, that's just, you know, the police have had kickings for years and years. But he was explaining what, I didn't realise this, but the way it works in the police is the first 5 years is pretty poorly paid. And then you get some quite decent pay jumps at sort of years 5, 6 and 7. Because the point is, you know, a lot of people join and don't tough it out, and you can completely understand why. And of course that happens in a lot of jobs, but you can understand particularly why in the police. But once you're in the firm or whatever, or you've shown you've got the battle hardened mentality to do what you need to do, then the better money sort of comes along. And that's what
That's exactly how it works in a business, right? First few
well,
years you get paid very little,
Yeah.
and then the
and see
longer
if
you
you're going to
stay.
stick it out. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Piotr. Absolutely, you might lose money. You know, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I was literally having that conversation with Carolina yesterday. You know, she runs her own design company, really smashing it at the moment. But the first few years were so hard, and she was just saying, "I wish people just realised that for the first couple of years, like if you break even, you're doing pretty well. You know, in a standard kind of
I
business
think, and then
setup."
most of the business, like it's easier to have a corporate job for the first few years, right, than to actually make money from the business, because it's an investment of time and effort into something long term rather than a quick.
This maybe speaks to my abilities or not as a mentor, but I was on when I did my MBA, as we're 20 minutes in and I haven't mentioned it yet today. The business school have a mentoring program, and I joined as a mentee. And I had a great guy who had a corporate career. So our career paths weren't similar at all, but his mentality was fantastic. I learned a lot from him. You know, we still talk today. And he said to me afterwards, he said, look, you need to be a mentor, not a mentee. Get yourself on the program. And I've got a perfect record on the program of convincing people not to leave their fantastically paid corporate jobs at the time. You know, I've dealt with people who are either expecting a child, have got 2 young children, and just given them the reality of those first few years and said, look, the thing is, what you might as well do right now is find an extra 20 hours a week, which if you're doing your own MBA at the moment, you won't have. You will not have it, right? But when you finish, use those 20 or 25 hours that you're using and work those on top of your corporate job and your family, because that's what your first few years will look like in your own business. And if you're, you know, targeted and driven and well organized, you can do a lot in those 20 to 25 hours rather than sometimes do what people do. And I think I see it, or not even necessarily people who've just gone full-time in property. They haven't got that structure around them, and they can't, and they don't realize that actually they're only doing 15, 20 hours a week of focused work. Now look, if you've left corporate after 20, 25, 30 years, that might be what you want. And whatever you're doing, as long as you're doing it deliberately, I'm not knocking that at all. But I think it needs to be done deliberately. And all of them have stayed where they were and thanked me for being as honest as I've been. And one of them has done really well on the side and can work to a point where it is time to leave the corporate role and transition out from, you know, these days, the bonus of COVID, they can go down from 5 days a week to 4 to maybe 3 and work it through that way. And also companies are a little bit more. I was asking someone on Friday at our Pitt Manchester meeting who works for Microsoft, you know, how do Microsoft feel about the fact she's got an Amazon fulfillment drop shipping business and also got a property portfolio in a limited company? Because she's quite senior, and I wondered if they would be particularly difficult about that. But she said, no, as long as there's not, you know, obvious conflict or whatever, no problem. She said all the people above her have all got property portfolios in companies and family investment companies and whatever. So, you know, one rule for them, one rule for us can't really work anymore. And that was a very interesting conversation. But interesting enough, what we spent most of our time talking about was how people who are busy doing other things can sometimes not realise. And in the same meeting, we had a different conversation with a guy representing someone who wants to sell a portfolio that ranges well into the millions, but it's a side job for this guy who's the CEO of a listed company. First of all, they were saying, oh, he's going to come to the meeting on Friday. I was like, no, he's not. He's not, because he's not going to be able to come physically. I'd love him to come to a Pitt meeting, but he's not going to be physically able to do that. He'll send someone, and that's what he did. But again, he spends very, very little of his time looking at the property business for what it is. And on exit, if he's not careful, and it's very likely, you know, we won't be the buyers of that portfolio, I'm sure. But on exit, if he's not careful, he'll cost himself quite a lot of money. And that's where the value really is at the margin. You know, it could be 10, 20, 30, 40% difference quite easily in how the exit is achieved. And I've bought lots of stuff where obviously their exit hasn't been optimal because they've sold it to me, and that's why I've been buying it. And so that's why people need to be quite cautious. I also had a great chat with Trish McGurr, who I don't know if you guys have met in person. But yeah, fantastic chat about her repossession rescue stuff, which really interested me. So I'm sure as and when there's a chance to talk to Trish in the future for anybody, they'd be really interested. I recommend connecting with her and having a chat. Ethical distressed assets. I love it. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Ethical distressed assets. Yeah, we've seen a big rise in kind of inquiries and sort of things that we get from other people, which are like distressed leads, where people either want to sell in the auction or just want to sell quick because they need to exit. So we're working on a few leads right now, but it's been a massive rise in how much people need to exit quickly, just because everyone kind of expects that something worse might be coming, and that's why they need to offload and do stuff.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a couple of competing things going on here. Number one, COVID made things move much more quickly than they otherwise would have done. Number two, RICS is starting to write in a recession before it's happened, which is probably the second or third time over the last probably the third time I've seen that happen in the last 6 years, which is a bit cheeky, to be honest with you. But the other side of it is, one thing we do have in the current monetary system that we use is quite a good record of kicking things down the road reasonably well. And the reaction to 100 billion plus of stimulus in order to prop up the energy price market, for example, has not been horrific. And maybe it shouldn't be, because, if the government tax revenues are 916 billion or whatever they were last year, it's a lot of money, but it's, 1/9 of a year's money or something to that order. And if you can grow that 916, and even better, you can grow it by cutting taxes. And of course, now we're back into the ideological rather than the data driven, because so many things change all the time. But it's self-evidently obvious that if tax is 100%, and in fact we do have the data, because in the 70s there were points where tax was, in Sweden, tax was 102% in the 70s. You see what disincentive that provides for businesses. So by not raising corporation tax, that will be interesting, and not definitionally inflationary, because it means, but on the flip side, it also means anybody waiting to invest next year might also bring that investment forward to this year, because there's a bigger incentive to invest when tax is 25% than when it's 19, to an extent. But also then the dividends that might have been declared before the change may well now not be declared. So there's tax revenue that doesn't come into the exchequer. What I mean, it's quite complex to know how it's going to play out. But I would love to see the goal being, rather than the conservative ideology saying we are low tax, we are this, we are that, I would rather them say, look, we're going to maximize the tax revenue in the long run because it's for the good of the country. We think that is done by having low taxes to encourage growth and free ports and all the other things that are going on. And we'll tweak it accordingly as we go along. We won't just have low tax in a Donald Trump kind of way, where we just lower taxes that help out, less than 1% of the population in a very disproportionate way, which is ultimately how the tax cuts in the Trump regime played out.
It's a comment from Will.
Yeah.
Lower rates equates to higher taxation take.
And as long as we can have that conversation on a data-based basis, I'm very, very comfortable with that, because I've seen it lots over the past few years, people saying, well, what's the point? What's the point? Because if I'm paying 40 after a dividend and 25 on corporation tax, I'm getting taxed 55, 60%. What's the point? I won't bother to grow the company. Just sit there, take the money, don't invest, don't create jobs. Well, that's completely the wrong attitude. And the government lose out because they don't get the bigger businesses with the created jobs that pay the national insurance, that do all of those those other things that pay the business rates that, you know, if you look at, much as I'm not on the same page politically or ideologically as the man, if you go into Wetherspoons, the salubrious properties that they provide for the general public, there's usually a propaganda magazine out there, but on the first page of his propaganda magazine, he does normally list the take and then how it breaks down in terms of business rates, VAT, this, that. And the reality is Wetherspoons is a low margin business, which won't surprise anybody because it's a pile them high, sell them cheap sort of thing. And if we move beyond the ethical argument of supplying alcohol to alcohol dependents, then it's a high volume business and they pay a lot of tax and they employ a lot of people. And you know what? They don't do a bad job. And you could argue they're better off in Wetherspoons than they are, you know, sitting on the street corner or whatever potential alternatives there are. I'm talking about the 9 a.m. Wetherspoons crowd, to be clear, rather than the cultured evening ladies and gentlemen who step out to their local pub.
We had lunch there yesterday, and there's babies there, the magazines there, all this kind of stuff, and it's kind of like Wetherspoons anti-propaganda, where they point out where the media has misrepresented them, and then it starts the conversation of they're using the word anti-propaganda as propaganda against the propaganda. Keep track of that train of thought if you can. It was kind of, I thought it was brilliant because this guy was like, no, I'm not putting up with it. Then every single table, as well as having a menu, has their own kind of propagandist material, which was absolutely brilliant.
I've never seen that. I'm gonna have to go to one, but not this week because I'll be back in Malta. I'm gonna hop, guys. So see you next Sunday and have a great week, everybody.
Safe
travel.
Safe flight.
Bye.
Okay. I think the motives around taxation at the moment is it's quite sporadic. It's not efficient. There are massive energy companies saying to the government, you need to tax us more. We're still going to invest, but you need to tax us more. You need to tax us more. You need to drop down the reliance on the public to kind of fund however it is that you want it to fund it. You need to do that. So they're actually asking for a efficiency in the taxing model on their industry. Then you have other sides which goes the other way, you know, talking about the increase of corporation tax and things like that. You're right. You know, at the moment, I think there was a statistic during COVID where the number of new companies being formed over a specific period was like treble of the previous period, right? The number of people are thinking, right, yeah, I'm working from home, but I'm now my side hustle. I'm going to make it a real thing. It's no longer just something I work off of my Instagram or my Twitter or whatever it is. I'm going to form a company. I'm going to try and make this work whilst I'm doing my own thing. That just catapulted. And it's kind of, and the amount of money that generates, like not just the GDP, but in maybe not the smaller stuff, but in staffing, in, you know, paying more accountants to do more things. And, you know, there's a trickle down effect of that.
And this is the whole sort of R&D argument, which at least we are sort of recognizing, although we need more tech investment in this country, because Uber, Deliveroo, pick any tech company you want, generally get slagged off quite a lot. They don't pay people enough, blah, 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 blah. But in reality, what they do quite often is they bring business that would have been cash only business, some of which wouldn't have made it into the taxation books, right? And they put it on the books. And they do a job. They collect tax for HMRC. You know, in many ways, they should be really praised for that. They never are. And look, I'm not saying they're always, when what's his name, Travis Kalanick, is it, who founded Uber, who I remember years ago basically said, look, when there's self-driving cars, you lot are gone, mate. Forget about it, you know. And it's like, you maybe could have phrased that a little bit better, Travis, I think. Which possibly why he's not the CEO anymore, apart from some of the other things that he also got up to. But I think there is a lot to be said for tech solutions that enable, because ultimately, what do we all want? We want everybody to pay their tax in a fair and reasonable way. And we've all seen people who are not paying their tax, and we've all seen people who we at least strongly suspect are laundering money through property and all the rest of it. You know, and what we need The reality is, if everybody was paying everything they were due to, the tax rate could be lower because the tax take would be more. And then we could see if we lowered it by 1%, whether we did. And I am wondering whether next week we're going to see, and I think we are looking at, are we looking at a full budget this year as well? Maybe it'll wait to March. But the 1% tax cut that was put in by Rishi, there was obviously nothing to do with the upcoming election. Just happened to be timed reasonably well. But I could see that potentially being brought forward because that the more money in pocket, and 20 might go down to 19 below 25k or something like that. I guess we'll find out next week. I'm looking forward to the nonsense acronym that they've come up with, because it's the press have filled in the gap, haven't they? Because instead of a fiscal event, it's like, mate, it's an emergency mini budget. And that comes back to my point around, we should be on an emergency footing here. Not that we need to be quaking in our beds, not that we need to be thinking like that, but in the event of, do you know what? We need a plan to get out of this, guys, and we need to follow it over the course of several years. And as I say, some of it's out of our control, but we'll control everything we can, and we'll protect everybody that we can. But that's the truth, and the truth and politics just don't mix, do they? They just don't mix.
That's the thing, and I think that's why people have problems with paying taxes and everything, because it's not about actually paying the taxes. It's about knowing what goes on with your money and how people who are responsible for distributing the money, making sure that investments are done, like how they kind of handle it, right? And I know a lot of people who have mostly got problem with that. It's not the problem with just sharing the money that they make from the business. It's about problem with trusting the people who are there to handle the money, and that's the key kind of to taxation issues.
Yes, I think that's very, very, very fair and reasonable, Piotr. Totally.
Yeah. And there's a comment from Will again. Will is
a biggie.
It's Will is really active at 9 a.m. I think the change of time for Will is working.
We've woken the beast.
Yes, in an economy, an organization, a career, you need a clear objective, the strategy identified. Where most people, organizations, the government are struggling with at the moment to know what they should do is the shifting sands of volatility that cause doubt and second guessing. The plan should have an end target.
Yeah, and I think when you think about organizations, whether they're small, medium, or large, there are some great large corporates out there that have really strong values that they truly believe in. If you ever met anyone who works for Johnson & Johnson, I would use as an example, because they have this credo, which I believe, Jay will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's Latin for I believe. And it really does come through. When I did my project, my MBA at the Coventry Building Society, they had a strong ethos to put their members first in what they did. And all the evidence that I saw in the head office was that they did actually believe that, and they did that. And when they had tough decisions to make, they would think, right, what's good for the members, what's good for the society, that's what we're going to do. Now, that included growing the deposit book and growing the loan book, because that's sustainability is good for the society. But they really did believe it, and it made them a better organization. Right? Where are the values of the government? We've had a conservative government, or a conservative, strongly influenced government for 12 years. And if you tried to pigeonhole the values of the government over the different leaders that it's had over that time, then you'd struggle, wouldn't you? I'd certainly struggle. What are Liz Truss's values? I don't know. What are the Conservative Party's values? Well, they've changed over the last, number of iterations of prime ministers. So why don't we have them, buy into them, understand them, and get behind them? Well, I'll tell you why we don't get behind them, because we don't know what they are. Like you just said, Piotr, if we don't know, or we don't trust where the money's going, and sometimes these big scandals don't help. Sometimes the media doesn't help. They make a big fuss over this or that costs 50 grand or something, and it's kind of like, all right, yeah, but I'm worried about £2 trillion worth of GDP right now. So I'm not answering the questions on 50 grand. Piss off, not bothered, right? It is what it is. There's no philosophy of waste it's a bit like the someone posted on Facebook this week. Look after the pennies and the pounds look after themselves. And they talked about why they didn't like this phrase, right? And I said, and a few people had chipped in with some quite good points about why, you're looking at you're focusing on the wrong thing, you're doing this, that, and the other. And my point was more, it's a top-down mentality, and it's a philosophy, and it's a way of life, right? So instead, if you consider that you don't like waste, then that can have a lot of good implications, because it can improve recycling and packaging, but also it can improve, how we allocate funds to different places, right? We don't like waste, so let's make that our prime driver and start by not wasting 37 billion on track and trace, and then we can then get down to why we're not wasting 50 grand or 100 grand on this. But the philosophy should look after itself. Everybody buys into it. The civil service buy into it, and that's that. What are the values of the civil service? The one constant that there is behind the political machine? I don't know. What are the values of HMRC? Make sure there should be. Make sure everybody pays the tax, right? And make sure that it's collected efficiently and people are treated fairly. That should be HMRC's value, shouldn't it? Is it? No, because as soon as they communicate with you about anything, it's like, right, we're assuming you've done something wrong, so we're going to put a lot of psychological pressure on you to try and make you break, and then we'll go further and further and further if we feel like we should or need to. And it's like, is that helping? It's just a lot of it makes no sense whatsoever. But there we go. I don't think we're going to fix that this morning, gents, unfortunately.
I don't think so. Yeah.
No, sadly not. No.
Yeah.
If only words had the power they used to have, maybe we could.
Yeah. But I think we can improve this with an announcement. So, like one of the things we want to do with this Sunday special, after a few recommendations from listeners or people who want to listen but they don't have much time to like watch the video, and they can rewatch it afterwards. But some people prefer to listen to it in an audio format. So we're planning to take whatever we do on Sunday mornings and then put it into an audio form in form of a podcast. So that could allow the word of Adam and everyone else on the chat to spread and inspire maybe change in government, all sorts of other things. So we're planning
I like big goals, Piotr. I love that one. That's a great one.
So we're planning to launch this. It will take some time to perfect things and make things kind of ready for the podcast. But that's the ongoing thing for the next couple of weeks. And the change of time to 9 a.m. Like I said in the description of the thing, we're kind of moving this forward to 9 a.m. to make sure everyone can attend and contribute. And it seems like people are saying that 9 a.m. seems to work well. So I guess if someone is up by 10 a.m. on Sunday, they're also up by 9 a.m. The kind of thing, like it's either like you get up around 8, 9, or you get up at midday. So yeah. Anything else?
Well, yeah, I think the other thing to kind of look at there is obviously if you're not active on a Sunday morning and you miss it, you may not see the Sunday supplement that Adam puts out. So you may miss it on Facebook, you may miss it on LinkedIn. But if you go onto the Partners in Property website and join the newsletter, you get that comes to you. I get the email forward of that like every Monday morning, something like that. So don't miss that out. And we'll pop a link to that, so you're kept informed if you don't see the post, but you join this call, or you're watching or you're listening to the future podcast that this will be turning into. And likewise, any updates that we do, that's property, that's auctions, that's what we're up to, that's properties that we're selling, we'll also put our newsletter in there as well. So that the link to both of those will be coming across the 3 platforms that we blast this out to. So that'll be Facebook, that will be LinkedIn, and it will be the UK Property Sisters YouTube channel as well. So everyone will get a link to that. and that just that makes sure that you're kind of either joining the call or joining the podcast with a little bit more detail and a little bit more information, so you get a running start, and it means you don't miss out on all the cool and fun stuff that we're all up to.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, just one more thing I was wondering after a little bit of the auction chatter we've had today. Have you had many chats with asset managers or similar receivers, liquidators, in terms of how active or they either are or might be getting or are expecting to get over the next maybe quarter or so?
I've spoken to a couple of asset managers, but for the most part, a lot of them have gone to ground. They've got some real issues, because two of the largest in the country, in the middle of COVID, they took a lot of their staff that were in the asset management, progressing files, going through court cases and stuff like that, and dispersed them elsewhere throughout the company. So one of them is LSL. So it's a massive, if you don't know LSL, but LSL is massive. So they took a lot of their asset managers and moved them across to their lettings and management and that side of things. And then trying to get them to pull back into asset management has been quite difficult, because when they're in the lettings and the actual management side, they're getting commission. There really isn't a commission structure in asset management, sadly. So getting people to move back into that has been quite difficult for them and one other. In terms of the receivers, we're seeing, so when we talk to the auctioneers, we're quite fortunate that 3 auctioneers that we talk to also have receivers attached to them. So it's like when you're talking to Allsops and Savills and Strettons, you can always ask, how busy is that team? What's going on there? What's the vibe? Because for the most part, especially with Allsops and Strettons, they get fed a lot of stock into their auction that comes from their receivership asset management departments. And you do get a good vibe for how busy they are based on the number of lots that are in their catalogue that say by order of X, Y, and Z. And they seem to be doing quite busy, but you'd be surprised how many receivers stay away from real estate. I mean, there's 7 or 8 large ones that are they're known to be the real estate receivers for the country, right? But then all the others, they'll get the odd bit that they can't palm off that they have to deal with. So yeah, it's difficult to really get a solid conversation out of those ones. But I know a guy who he's like the lead practitioner. I call him Mr. Fisher. He's as smart as the former world grandmaster chess champion. And he's really cool to have a chat with, because he goes to all of the R3s and he sponsors them and he does all these. So R3 is the receivership conference, and he's quite involved at a rather senior and I think board level on some of these big receivership bankruptcy boards that they have. And he's always got some interesting things to say. And he says it's as busy as ever. He said the fortunate thing, if you can call it a fortunate thing, is that a lot of companies that are closing down, going into voluntary wind-ups, is that they're still so early on in the process that there's not a great deal to wind up. It's almost a formality. He says we're not seeing like the behemoths going down yet, or companies that have been in operation 15, 20 years that are going to have a lot of 2P and a lot of background assets that they have to wind down. So he said in that respect, it's still very much a tick box paperwork process exercise.
So I guess some of that is, the bounce back loans and the C-bills and the government back stuff kind of papered over a few cracks for a lot of companies that probably shouldn't have had their cracks papered over. You go back to what Piotr was saying earlier around, first 5 years, let's say, of to pick a time frame of running your own business, and the difficulties and everything else. And there's that 90% go bust in the first 5 years. That's not a hook. It's not a brown tinted spectacle or whatever. It's just a factual thing, So if that, if the bounce back loans and all the rest of it gave them a couple of years free pass, I mean, Rod talks about this quite a lot, and he's absolutely right in what he says. it's fine and well having low rate loans, and that's great. It's lovely. But when you've got a capital repayment period, right, it's paying the capital back that can be part of the problem. Because if you took that 50 grand, or if you had a bigger business and you took that 250 grand or that 500 grand or whatever, where is it today? And is it earning more money? Because if it's not, and it went out to do a number of other things, maybe you stretched yourself with it a little bit. If you're on a C-bills loan, those are floating rate loans,
I know someone who got the bounce back in the C-bills and went out and bought a fully vamped and souped up Harley Davidson. It was his dream. So he got this free money from the government and went out and bought this absolute beast of a bike.
Hopefully it's gone up in value, Jay. Hopefully.
Well, yeah, I mean, they say once you take it off the forecourt, most things tend to drop. But I think if he holds it for 50 years, it might come round.
It's a hell of a 50-year bomb that is, mate. But it's not yielding anything. That's the problem.
No, that's it. Yeah,
fumes. It's only yielding fumes. Where will you get the fuel from in 50 years' time? Can you imagine the price of it? Or it'll be interesting.
Oh, the guy would need to invest in a solar conversion.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Or get some kind of hydrogen converter or something like that. Whatever other power source they'll go with.
Yeah.
Nice one. Dominic asked if we're gonna link our Property Investor News Magazine articles to. Usually, like with that, those are kind of just printed, and we get copies of it like maybe after like 4 weeks since the launch of the magazine. So it's I guess you need to be subscriber to get access to the articles.
I'm sure you can get it on the website, but
you can get it on the website, and the website is also for subscribers, I think.
Yeah, I mean, all of us at times. I think myself, Adam writes for Property Investor News Magazine. Helen writes for Property Investor News Magazine. Myself and Piotr split an article. So yeah, it's
the title. Piotr does the rest. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, I think we grab the tagline, and Piotr puts all the stuff that people want to read into it.
It works.
We've got a good little balance. I do a bit of a market update or take an auction style principle, and Piotr puts in like a case study. The last one was actually really bloody good. So
yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah. We've only got 7 days till the deadline though, so just bear in mind that's the next article. So in case your calendar hasn't popped up again, this is a genuine one. So
the deadline have been changing so much that the calendar entries that I had from like last year, they're no longer relevant, and we kind of like learned to ignore them, which is dangerous.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Yeah. The Property Investor Show's coming up, isn't it? And that's the driver. Is it the 9th and the 10th, or is it the 8th and the 9th? Is it
8th and the 9th? Oh, no, 7th and the 8th or something. Because I'm speaking.
You're right. 7th and the 8th. Yeah.
I'm speaking on the 7th, so it's I'm heading down on the Friday.
Amazing. Well, brilliant. Well, we posted some of the links. If you guys enjoyed the show or the Sunday supplement, Adam writes, keep sharing that on social media. And I think we kind of finished for today. It's approaching 10 o'clock. So should we wrap it up here?
That'd be fabulous, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone, for listening. See you, everyone.
Great job. Thanks for the comments and the questions, everyone. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye,
See you next week.